There exists a peculiar form of violence that requires no weapons, no confrontation, no raised voices. It is the violence of absence, the calculated withdrawal that leaves others grasping at shadows. Throughout history, the greatest demonstrations of power have often come not from those who dominated every room they entered, but from those who knew precisely when to leave, and more importantly, how to vanish so completely that their absence became more commanding than their presence ever was. Consider the merchant who walked away from a profitable partnership in Renaissance Florence, never explaining why, never returning calls, simply evaporating from the commercial life of the city. His former partner spent years trying to understand what went wrong, what offense had been committed, whether reconciliation was possible. The merchant, meanwhile, had already established himself in Venice under a different name, building an empire, while his old associate remained paralyzed by unanswered questions. This was not cruelty for its sake, it was strategic disappearance, the kind Machiavelli himself would have recognized as a masterwork of psychological warfare. The modern world has forgotten the power of disappearance. We live in an age of constant availability, where absence is seen as rudeness, where not responding within hours triggers anxiety and anger. Yet it is precisely in this climate of perpetual connection that strategic withdrawal has become the ultimate form of control. When everyone expects immediate response, silence becomes deafening. When everyone broadcasts their every thought and movement, invisibility becomes mysterious. When everyone seeks validation through visibility, those who disappear become unforgettable. The man who understands this principle understands something fundamental about human nature. We are haunted far more by what we cannot understand than by what we know. A rejection explained is a rejection processed. A departure with reasons given is a departure accepted. But a vanishing without explanation becomes an eternal question mark. A wound that never quite heals because it was never properly understood. The disappeared person lives rent-free in the minds of those left behind, occupying psychological space far greater than they ever commanded through presence. This is where Machiavelli's insights into power intersect with deeper truths about human psychology. The prince teaches us that it is better to be feared than loved, but what Machiavelli understood, and what most readers miss, is that the most powerful fear is not the fear of what someone might do, but the fear of not knowing what they're thinking, where they are, or what they've become. Presence creates familiarity, and familiarity breeds contempt. Absence, properly executed, breeds obsession. Watch what happens in the immediate aftermath when someone truly disappears from another person's life. Not a dramatic exit with explanations and closure, but a clean vanishing. Social media silent, mutual friends given no information, all communication channels cut. In the first 48 hours, there is disbelief. Surely they'll reach out. Surely there's been a mistake. The person left behind checks their phone compulsively, refreshes social media feeds, considers reasons that might explain the silence. They tell themselves stories. Perhaps there's been an emergency, perhaps a technical issue, perhaps a test of some kind that they're meant to pass. But you can see it beginning even then, the first stirring of something deeper. The disappeared person is already becoming larger in their absence than they were in their presence. Every shared memory suddenly carries new weight. Every conversation is re-examined for hidden meanings. The relationship, whatever its nature, is being rewritten in real time, transformed from something ordinary into something significant by the sheer fact of unexplained absence. By the end of the first week, disbelief has hardened into something else. This is when the first of the 7 responses begins to manifest fully, though in truth all 7 are interconnected, flowing into and out of each other like movements in a symphony of psychological disruption. The first thing they feel is confusion that metastasizes into obsession. This is not the mild confusion of misunderstanding a text message or missing an appointment. This is the profound disorientation of having someone simply cease to exist in your sphere while still existing in the world. They know you're alive. Maybe they've heard through mutual acquaintances. Maybe they've caught a glimpse of your digital shadow, but you're unreachable. And that unreachability becomes all-consuming. Human beings are pattern recognition machines. We survive by making sense of our environment, by understanding cause and effect, by predicting behavior. When someone disappears without explanation, they break the pattern so completely that the mind cannot rest. It keeps working the problem, turning it over and over, trying to find the logic in it. This is why disappearance is more powerful than any argument you could make, any explanation you could give. Arguments can be countered, Explanations can be dismissed, but absence without explanation cannot be processed. It simply sits there, an unsolved equation that the mind returns to again and again. The person left behind begins to catalogue every interaction, every conversation, searching for the moment when things changed. They construct elaborate theories, each one feeling momentarily satisfying before crumbling under scrutiny. Were they too available? Too demanding? Too boring? Too intense? The questions multiply because there are no answers. And in that vacuum, the disappeared person becomes mythologized. They are no longer the flawed, ordinary human they were when present. They become a puzzle, a mystery, a ghost that haunts every quiet moment. This confusion serves a specific function in the economy of power. It keeps the other person engaged with you even in your absence. They cannot move on because they cannot understand. And so they remain tethered to you, psychologically bound to someone who has already freed themselves from the connection. You have achieved what every strategist dreams of: influence without effort, presence without availability, power without responsibility. The second feeling that rises in the wake of disappearance is a desperate, clawing curiosity that borders on madness. If confusion is the question, curiosity is the obsessive pursuit of answers that will never come. They need to know where you are, what you're doing, who you're with. What do you think of them? Whether you regret leaving, whether you're happy or miserable, whether you've changed or stayed the same. This curiosity manifests in predictable ways. They check your last active status if any trace of you remains online. They ask mutual friends casual questions that are anything but casual. They drive past places you used to frequent. They construct elaborate scenarios in their minds about your new life, each one more dramatic than the last. You've either found someone better, or you're alone and regretful. You're either thriving in ways that make them irrelevant, or you're struggling in ways that prove they mattered. What makes this curiosity so powerful is its futility. Every piece of information they gather only generates more questions. If they learn you're doing well, they wonder why you seem fine without them. If they learn you're struggling, they wonder why you still won't reach out. The curiosity becomes self-perpetuating, a hunger that grows stronger with every scrap of information because no amount of information can answer the only question that truly matters. Why did you disappear? Machiavelli understood that power lies not in providing answers but in controlling questions. The person who disappears controls the entire frame of reference. They decide what is known and what remains mysterious. They decide when information flows and when it stops. They decide where the questions get answered or simply hang in the air, tormenting those who ask them. This is not cruelty. It is clarity about how psychological dominance actually works. The third response is perhaps the most predictable and yet the most revealing. They feel rejected, but it's a rejection that cannot be fully processed. Rejection with explanation is a wound that can heal. You understand why you weren't chosen, what you lacked, what went wrong. You might disagree with the assessment, but at least there's an assessment to disagree with. Rejection through disappearance is different. It's a rejection so complete that it denies the rejected person even the dignity of understanding their own dismissal. This creates a unique form of psychological damage. The person cannot defend themselves against accusations never made. They cannot improve based on feedback never given. They cannot find closure on a relationship that was never formally ended. They exist in a state of permanent rejection, always wondering if maybe, possibly, there's still a chance for reconciliation, for explanation, for resolution. This hope, however faint, keeps them trapped in a psychological holding pattern, unable to fully move forward because the door was never actually closed, just abandoned. The genius of this approach, from a Machiavellian perspective, is that it requires no cruelty, no harsh words, no dramatic confrontations. You simply withdraw your presence, and the other person's own mind does all the work. They torture themselves with questions you never asked them to answer. They feel rejected based on a judgment you never explicitly rendered. They remain attached to you through a connection you've already severed. You have achieved complete strategic victory without firing a single shot. But there's something deeper happening here, something that leads us into the fourth response. Beneath the rejection, feeding it and being fed by it, is an insidious self-doubt that begins to poison everything. When someone disappears without explanation, the person left behind inevitably turns the interrogation inward. What was wrong with me? What did I do? What could I have done differently? This self-questioning is not a sign of weakness. It's a fundamental feature of human psychology. We assume that major events have major causes, And when someone important vanishes from our life, we assume we must have done something important to cause it. This self-doubt is particularly insidious because it's not based on any specific criticism. If someone tells you that you're too controlling, you can examine that claim, agree or disagree, and move forward. But when someone simply disappears, the self-doubt has no specific target. Maybe you were too much. Maybe you weren't enough. Maybe you were too available. Maybe you weren't available enough. Every possible flaw suddenly seems like a plausible explanation. And in trying to figure out which one was the fatal error, the person begins to question everything about themselves. Watch how this plays out over